United States we go now, where the Vice President Mike Pence and Democratic challenger Kamala Harris clashed over the Trump administration's handling of the race relations during their debate last night. Harris criticized Trump for turning down an opportunity to denounce white supremacists at last week's debate with Biden. In his response, he accused the media of taking Trump's words out of context and said that the president had repeatedly rejected racist groups.
With regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd, and justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist, and that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know, who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day, that President Trump and I stand with you.
Last week, the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And
not true.
It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban. On the issue of Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting the need for racial justice, where a young woman was killed. And on the other side, there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial epithets, anti-Semitic slurs. And Donald Trump, when asked about it, said there were fine people on both sides. This is who we have as the President of the United States. And America, you deserve better.
All right, so for the latest on this, let us now cross to our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. So this one a bit less chaotic than the previous one between presidential nominees, though here and there Kamala Harris had to call Mike Pence to order, going as far as saying, "I'm speaking," which I quite felt when she said it.
Yeah, certainly not the histrionics and the hysteria and what they called a dumpster fire of the first debate. We didn't see that, even though, as journalists or people watching these debates, you do tend to look for some or wait for some of the dramatic moments, Palesa. But it got as dramatic as you just pointed out. Mike Pence trying to interrupt Kamala Harris. If she made a point, he'd say, that's not true. She would then turn to him and say, "Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. Let's have a conversation." Okay, so that's about as dramatic as it got. But I think that's essentially what American voters were looking for. They were looking for a substantive debate, and I think they got that last night from issues around coronavirus, of course, the pandemic. She called this the greatest failure of any United States presidential administration in the history of the country. So that was really a jab that landed, and it's very difficult for Mike Pence to defend against the facts that 210,000 Americans have died, over 7 million Americans have been infected. The president himself is recuperating at the White House after his diagnosis last week. And of course, the super spreader event around that nomination in the Rose Garden 2 weekends ago, where he officially nominated his replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court, and the subsequent revelations that some 34 people associated who work at the White House, in addition to campaign staff, in addition to GOP senators, in addition to various other people in the top brass of the military are now quarantining, really pointing to the White House being an epicenter at a very super spreader level event in terms of the number of infections we're seeing here. So very difficult for Mike Pence in that moment to defend it. But also discussions around the Supreme Court, climate change, healthcare in the United States, and race in America. So more substance, Palesa, for voters to chew on. But the question is, how many voters that are undecided are there left still to get? And I think the fear here for the Republicans Republicans is that they're running out of track. They're running out of field in terms of being able to make sort of last-minute moves less than a month before Election Day.
And many people, of course, are of the view that Pence changed the subject every time he was asked a tough question. What are people saying about him? And who do they think made it for them last night?
Yeah, I mean, this is a difficult question. Some of the immediate polls that you see afterwards was really split evenly. And I think that just speaks to the entrenched nature of politics and where we find ourselves in this race. We often talk about when does the election and campaign period start in the United States. And my argument is always when the last election ended. And that would have been in 2016, right, in November, when Hillary lost. That's when the process for electing the next president begins immediately. So I feel that there's not that much maneuverable room for both sides in terms of getting, that sliver of the electorate that perhaps hasn't decided. But you are quite correct that a number of questions posed by Susan Page, the moderator, who really had a better time of it than Chris Wallace a week ago. She managed to control the time a little bit better, but often her great questions were not answered. I've got a list of some of them. She asked, why should Americans follow CDC guidelines if the White House itself does not follow them? And of course, Mike Pence ducked the question and talked about something completely different. He was asked a question about Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court judgment many years ago that made abortion in the United States legal. And of course, there's a reconfiguration happening at the Supreme Court. So the question was, if Roe v. Wade falls away, given the new composition on the Supreme Court, what would you like to see happen in your state of Indiana, where he's formerly a governor? Also didn't answer that. Two questions put to both candidates was in terms of the age of their principals, right? But both President Trump at 74 and Joe Biden at 77 are quite old. Joe Biden would become the oldest elected president of the United States were he to prevail in November. So the question was about presidential disability and whether as vice presidents, as vice presidential nominees who are essentially second in line to the presidency, have you had discussions about, the age of your principals and what that could mean if things went wrong? None of them answered that. Kamala Harris was also asked, Palesa, whether a Biden-Harris administration would seek to expand the Supreme Court, add more justices, essentially, were they to lose the current nomination fight to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Remember, Senate hearings in the Judiciary Committee start as early as next week, and she also avoided answering that. Talking about whatever they want to talk about when a specific question is answered, that was really a case on both sides last night.
Yeah, but there's been a development around the virtual presidential debate between Trump and Biden. Trump says he won't participate in it. Biden, on the other hand, saying that he's fine with it.
Yeah, so essentially, remember last night they debated with plexiglass separating the two of them because concern from certainly the Debates Commission, the Presidential Debates Commission, and the Biden-Harris campaign about where Mike Pence has been. You'll remember that his communications director is married to Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is a senior advisor to President Trump who revealed his positive diagnosis 2 days ago. So his communications director, essentially had to withdraw from the team. So plexiglass on the stage. Now the Debates Commission is saying that due to the uncertainty surrounding when President Trump was infected, there's even speculation that he arrived on the debate stage in Cleveland, Ohio last week, infected with the coronavirus, although this is not being confirmed by the White House, but they've also not confirmed when the president received his last negative coronavirus test. And this is critical, Palesa, in terms of contact tracing. So what the Debates Commission has now said is that they will have the second presidential debate next week as a virtual event. The Trump campaign immediately saying, President Trump himself saying he doesn't want to be part of a virtual debate. He's not going to waste his time. The Joe Biden campaign has said they're okay with this because they understand the health implications. Were the 77-year-old Democratic nominee to be infected, he would be in that high-risk category, similar to what President Trump is. Even though he's a bit slimmer than the president, perhaps doesn't have as many underlying conditions, there's still a great concern about keeping him healthy and keeping him safe. So this is something that is playing itself out right now. We don't know if there is going to be a second debate on October 15th. That will hinge on whether President Trump changes his mind, which he's certainly known to do.
All right, so just before we let you go, Sherwin, at the beginning you said that there wasn't, that much drama with last night's debate, but there was
I know what you're going to ask.
There was a very dramatic fly on Mike Pence's head that actually stole the show. Had it been here in South Africa, they were going to say it was Bayer Lastig.
It really was. It really was. It literally sat upon his head. And you remember being a black fly on a grey head. It really had a prominent position in this debate. I'm surprised. I'm sure Kamala Harris was very pleased to have the plexiglass separating herself and the fly. But yes, I'll tell you that it's a big story in the United States. The New York Times was one of the first to come out with a story last night about the fly and the 2 minutes of fame on Mike Pence's head. But certainly, hopefully, not going to distract voters from what it is that's the most important thing here, Palesa, picking a candidate and voting on November 3rd. That's
what South Africans have been talking about since this morning. Well, we have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thanks, Palesa.
All right, our U.S. correspondent there, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, looking at last night's debate.